A beautiful and mysterious stranger has appeared, but her appearance has granted the monster the opportunity he has so long desired. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for the 13th in an ever-evolving series on Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This video will have three separate sections: a So What Happened recap of the chapter that we just read, a literary criticism section where we talk about all of the literary goings-on in this chapter, and finally a writer's corner where we talk about the lessons that we can take from chapter 13 of Frankenstein as writers ourselves. So, what happened? It's springtime for the cottagers, and though this doesn't seem to lighten their moods, it certainly eases the stress of their work. One day, a woman on a horse stops by and asks for Felix, who is instantly overjoyed. The woman is beautiful and apparently does not speak the same language as Felix and his family. Also, she's referred to as the Arabian. How mysterious. Later, we learn that her name is Safi, and she is being taught the language by the cottagers. The perfect opportunity for the monster to Pirate Bay himself some English lessons. He passes the time in this way as Felix gives Safi lessons from Ruins of Empires by Volney. The monster questions everything about humanity through learning of the heights of civilization and the barbarity of war. He starts to consider what it is that makes a man worthy or valuable, and he rues that his own definition includes none of these things. Certainly there are some interesting things going on in this chapter, but the place where I want to start is on 118 of the text that I have, and it reads as such. So this is as the monster is overhearing Safi and Felix in their lessons. For a long time I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments. But when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased, and I turned away with disgust and loathing. This book was published in 1818, 100 years before the conclusion of World War I, 120 years before World War II. Boy, are you going to be shocked at what the next 130 years have in store for this civilization. And I don't think that how wild is it to think that Frankenstein's monster would be utterly terrified by the way the next 130 years rolled out, and the scale to which we would turn against one another. I guess that's the better way to say it, huh? Very little turning on, I think, during the World Wars. But one of the metaphors that I think is interesting to play with Frankenstein is the atomic bomb, right? The malady that is deriven from the extents of human scientific knowledge, if we allow it to go that way, and the disgust that those responsible for it feel after it has been activated. We see those things in this novel. We see the fallout after the monster has come to life. We see how Frankenstein reacts. And we can't help, I don't think, but to reflect on the Manhattan Project and the great quote where I am become death, destroyer of worlds, right? Perhaps there is no more fitting a metaphor for this novel than World War II and the bomb, except that the bomb itself does not reflect in the way that the monster does. Now, I want to go to the character of Safi herself. It is a very interesting development for this novel, a very interesting development for the monster to have this person show up in order to kind of scaffold his own learning of the language. Safi versus the monster. Safi and the monster are with the same problem. They have the same problem. They don't speak the language, but they are opposites outside of that. The monster, large and intimidating, terrifying to look at. Safi seems to be, he's also without, right? He has no money. He has no shelter, no real shelter. Safi is the opposite. She is beautiful. She seems to be wealthy by virtue of the fact that she has a horse. She is approachable, right? She seems to be lighthearted, all of these things. The monster is not. Because of their differences, Safi is taught directly, while and whereas the monster himself has to learn through secondhand. He has to steal these lessons from her, spy in as they are given to her. They are opposites with the same problem. That is an interesting comparison when you take it to the next idea here, but this is also the difference between the way that Safi and the monster are able to get their education. It is a reflection itself on the text that is used to teach Safi the ruins of empires. The monster is virtuous. He seems to be very caring. He tries to help people out with what it is that they are doing. He takes pity upon the cottagers, all of these things. I'm not saying that Safi doesn't, but Safi gets the full red carpet treatment because she is attractive. The monster does not. This is something which leads to downfalls of civilizations. But I want to take this further. This is from the very end of this chapter. The monster by himself reflecting. But where were my friends and relations? No father had watched my infant days, no mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses, or if they had, all my past life was now a blot, a blind vacancy in which I distinguished nothing. From my earliest remembrance, I had been as I then was in height and proportion. I had never yet seen a being resembling me, or who claimed any intercourse with me. What was I? The question again recurred, to be answered only with groans. Here we have to reflect not on Safi and the likenesses and differences between Safi and the monster, but upon Frankenstein himself. The differences between Frankenstein and the monster. Frankenstein, who has all of these things, not just all of these things, but one like Safi. Frankenstein has all of these things. He has the wealth, he has the friends, he has the family, he has the language. He has all of those things that the monster himself has to live without, has to do without. And he is, for all intents and purposes, the monster's father. Where would the monster be had he simply had a guiding hand in his reappearance in the living world? Had he had someone there to help him along the way? Had he been taught the language outright, not having to learn it through second hand? Would the monster have some chance in life if only there were a friend there for him to introduce him? Much like Safi, the monster has no one to introduce him. He has to simply show up and be taken as he is, or not. If the monster had someone to introduce him, so have you seen Young Frankenstein? The way that Frankenstein in that movie introduces his creation through song and dance, a tap dance routine. If you know where you, what is it? I don't remember the words. Doesn't matter. Um, that was an introduction. And though in that movie, and I know it's a comedy, the crowd takes him as a monster at first. They're shocked. They are in awe. But once he starts to do his song and dance, they become enamored until things go sideways in that scene. But what happens in this novel is, without anyone to introduce him, the monster is simply left to introduce himself, and especially without the power of language, he can't stop in and say, hey, I'm not as bad as I look. He just stops in and grunts. He stops in and makes these noises associated with monsters themselves. And in addition to his monstrous proportions and his monstrous appearance, these things lead to him being ostracized every step of the way, so much so that he learns fast enough what I need to do is keep my distance. Though he is intimating that he might try to meet these cottagers. He wants to reach out to them. He wants to belong with them. He wants to be a part of that family. Without an introduction, it becomes much more difficult. So, what is there to be taken from the likenesses with Safi versus the contrast with Frankenstein himself? Either way, the monster is left in this in-between world, this existence of not existing to anyone at anywhere at any time. The ruins of empires start with the ruins of individual lives. And that's what we have the cottagers, perhaps their tribe slowly growing with the introduction of Safi, but the same is not there for the monster. One thing that I have to acknowledge here is that this novel really does a very good job with its references. We've had several books and poems, etc., referenced in this novel. Now, I have read a lot of beginning writers. I've read a lot of people who were trying to get started with whether it be short stories, novels, poetry, or even script writing. And one thing that is really, really difficult to convey, and I think it is something necessary, though it would seem to be maybe not as essential as I'm going to make it sound, but you can really confuse your reader this way. If you're going to throw in a reference, it has to be for a point. It has to be for a reason. The books and the novels and the poems and everything that have been mentioned in this novel, they are mentioned because of what that book means, what it is that that book communicates. The poem has a certain aesthetic, and it is playing into what is being accomplished in the novel Frankenstein. You don't throw things into your writing because you like them. A lot of people try to put references to movies or books or short stories or poems or TV shows or whatever in their own writing, not because they have something thematically to do with their own work, the work in which the reference is being made, but because they like the thing. I think that's the wrong way to do it. And when you put a reference in your piece for some reason other than the fact that there is a thematic connection you're hoping to make, it leaves your reader distracted from your story. If, for example, all of a sudden in the middle of Frankenstein, you were getting references to A Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki, I would be taken out of the book because I don't know where that reference is headed. Versus when you talk about the ruins of empires, I understand that you're talking about the darker natures of man. If Frankenstein, if Hello Kitty were to make a reference to Frankenstein, it would be very confusing. Maybe not as confusing as if Frankenstein were to make a reference to Hello Kitty, but you see what I'm saying. Thematically, there has to be some connection. The author of whatever Hello Kitty you're watching, and you shouldn't be watching Hello Kitty, might really enjoy Frankenstein as a novel. But the minute Hello Kitty pulls up Frankenstein and starts reading it, is Hello Kitty a cartoon? Is it a book? I don't know. Is it a comic? I have no idea. Hello Kitty starts reading Frankenstein. You're looking for the connection. Why is Hello Kitty reading? Is Hello Kitty even her name? Anyway, doesn't matter. Why is Hello Kitty reading Frankenstein? When this novel references other novels, there is something in there to be gotten for the reader. Now, the second note here, that questioning at the very end of the chapter here. But where were my friends and relations? No father had watched my infant days, no mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses, or if they had, all my past life was now a blot. A blind vacancy in which I distinguished nothing. From my earliest remembrance I had been as I was then. In height and proportion I had never yet seen a being resembling me, or who claimed any intercourse with me. What was I? The question again recurred, to be answered only with groans. I will soon explain to what these feelings tended, but allow me now to return to the cottagers, whose story excited in me such various feelings of indignation, delight, and wonder, but which all terminated in additional love and reverence for my protectors. For so I loved, in an innocent, half painful self-deceit, to call them. Very, very easy for a passage like this, for these two paragraphs, to become melodrama. The reason they are not melodrama is that we have felt these things for the monster before he acknowledges them or explains them to us. We might not be so good with words as Mary Shelley through the monster, putting them on the page, but that's where they keep themselves from becoming melodrama. If There's two ways that this becomes melodrama. Number one, the moment is earned, like it is in this novel. We see the monster struggling in this way. We are there with him, but the words aren't so convincing. They are more ham-fisted. They are less thorough. They are seemingly emotionally exploitative. That's one way for this to become melodrama. The other way is if it's not earned. We haven't spent this time with the monster. The monster simply shows up and starts acting emo, then it's melodrama. So it's a very fine line between melodrama and something that is just dramatic. So the way that this is pulled off, you have to earn it. You have to earn that moment with your reader by making them feel the emotions first, and you have to word it very well. You have to give your reader the feelings that they themselves have. If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits? Putting on the Ritz.